The morning I got handcuffed in the lobby of my own office building started like any other weekday. Nothing dramatic, nothing cinematic, just coffee breath in the air and elevator chimes echoing off marble walls. And if you had told me that by 9:15 I'd be sitting in a security chair with cold metal around my wrists while strangers filmed me, I probably would have laughed and said, yeah, right, that only happens in viral videos. But yeah, that happened. I walked into that building the same way I had hundreds of times before, navy blazer, leather folder tucked under my arm, mind already running through compliance notes for a meeting upstairs. And I remember thinking about something completely ordinary, like whether I'd left my oven on when I heard a voice behind me say, "Ma'am, stop right there." And there was a tone in it, not loud, not angry, just sharp enough that it sliced through the morning noise and made my shoulders stiffen before I even turned around. I looked back and saw the security officer standing near the desk. Tall guy, rigid posture, hand hovering near his belt like he was posing for a training manual. And he stared at me the way people do when they've already decided something about you and they're just waiting for proof. And I said yes, like any normal person would. And he said, "I need you to step aside and show identification." And I thought maybe this was routine, maybe they were checking badges, maybe I'd missed a memo. So I asked, "Is there a problem?" And he said, "We got a report of a suspicious person in the lobby." And I glanced behind me because honestly I thought he meant someone else. And I said, "You mean me?" And he said, "Yes, ma'am," completely serious, no hesitation. And right there, something inside me shifted. Not fear exactly, more like awareness, like the moment you realize a conversation isn't what you thought it was going to be. I opened my folder slowly and handed him my company badge and access card and explained calmly that I was the chief compliance officer for the building's management firm, that these credentials authorized me to be there. And he barely looked at them before saying, "I still need your driver's license, and you'll wait over there while I verify." And the way he said wait wasn't a request, it was an order. And I remember thinking, okay, this is going somewhere, it doesn't need to go. So I asked, "What exactly made me suspicious?" And his jaw tightened and he said, "Ma'am, I'm not debating, I'm instructing." And you know that feeling when the room temperature drops even though the thermostat hasn't changed, that's what it felt like, because people nearby had started to notice footsteps slowing, conversations fading, that subtle shift when strangers realize they might be witnessing something uncomfortable. I handed him my license because I wasn't about to escalate things physically, and I told him I was cooperating, but that I also wanted it noted I was being detained without reasonable cause, and that sentence clearly irritated him because his nostrils flared slightly. And he said, "I decide what's reasonable." And I said, "Actually, the law does." And that's when the tension really settled in, like fog, thick and quiet and hard to ignore, and I could feel eyes on us, phones lowering heads, turning, curiosity spreading faster than sound. See, what he didn't know was that my entire career had been built on staying calm when powerful people tried to bluff their way through bad decisions. I grew up in a small Midwestern town where my parents worked non-stop and taught me early that composure is a kind of armor, that if you stay steady while someone else loses control, you already hold half the power in the room. And I carried that lesson through law school, through boardrooms, through investigations, where executives twice my age tried to intimidate me into silence. So standing in that lobby with a security officer demanding answers wasn't new territory. It just looked different. He handed back my badge but kept my license and told me again to step aside, and I asked, "Am I being detained?" And he said yes. And I said, "For what crime?" And he said, "For interfering with a security investigation," which made a couple people nearby whisper because even they could tell that didn't make much sense. And I nodded once and said, "Understood. I am complying under protest." And he told me I didn't need to narrate, and I said I always document procedural irregularities. And I swear you could almost hear his confidence crack a little, because suddenly I wasn't just some random person to him, I was someone speaking a language he didn't expect, someone who sounded like she knew exactly how situations like this unfold. A young employee near the reception desk whispered to her coworker, "Is she serious?" And the coworker whispered back, "I think she's winning." And he heard that I saw his ears turn red. And then he said, "I'm going to need you to place your hands behind your back." And for a second, the entire lobby went still. Like even the air paused. And I studied him carefully and asked, "On what grounds are you escalating this interaction?" And he said, "You're resisting procedure." And I said, "No, I'm questioning it." And that was apparently the wrong answer because the next sound was metal clicking open, and he stepped closer and repeated the command. Now here's the thing people don't realize unless they've been in that exact moment. When someone in authority tells you to put your hands behind your back, your body reacts before your mind does. Your pulse spikes, your muscles tighten, your thoughts start racing through consequences. but I forced myself to stay steady, and I turned and placed my hands behind me on my own, telling him clearly I was not resisting, and he cuffed me tighter than necessary, cold steel closing around my wrists, and I inhaled slowly, not because it hurt, but because I wanted to memorize everything, the pressure, the angle, the way his voice sounded, because evidence is strongest when you collect it in real time. People gasped softly. Phones lifted higher. Someone muttered, "Is this for real?" And he guided me toward the security office while whispers followed us like wind through leaves, and inside I could feel his certainty starting to wobble, because confident officers don't usually deal with calm detainees quoting legal standards. And every step we took, I could sense him realizing this situation wasn't going the way he'd imagined. He sat me in a chair under fluorescent lights and told me to wait, and I said I assumed. And he paced while I observed. And then the door opened and in walked Leonard Voss, the building's operations director, the kind of man who moves quickly only when something matters. And he looked at me, then at the cuffs, then at the officer, and said, "What's happening?" And the officer straightened and said, "Sir, I detained this individual pending verification." And Voss turned to me, and I said calmly, "Marissa Cole, Chief Compliance Officer. I believe there's been a misunderstanding," and the silence after that felt heavier than anything that had happened so far. Voss slowly faced the officer and asked, "You detained Ms. Dices?" Cole and the officer said, "She was reported suspicious," and Voss asked, "Did you verify her credentials?" And he said, "I was about to," and Voss held out his hand for my ID, glanced at it once, and then looked back at him with that expression managers get when they're not angry, just disappointed, and said, "I know who she is." And in that instant, the whole balance of the room flipped like gravity changed direction, and he ordered, "Remove the cuffs." And the officer hesitated, started to say something about protocol, and Voss repeated, "Remove them," and click, click, the metal opened and my wrists were free. I stood, rubbed the red marks lightly, thanked him, and the officer said I was following procedure, and I told him, "Procedure requires reasonable suspicion, not assumptions," and he didn't have an answer for that because there isn't one. By lunchtime, 3 different videos of the incident were circulating online, clear audio, clear angles, every word preserved, and by evening, thousands had seen them, by morning, millions, and people argued like they always do. Some saying he was just doing his job, others saying it was obvious, biased commentators dissecting the footage frame by frame, while legal analysts explained what should have happened instead. And me, I didn't go on TV or post some dramatic statement. I called an attorney and started documenting everything, timelines, witnesses, camera locations, policy language, because that's what I do. I build cases out of facts. The investigation didn't take long. They found prior complaints about him, similar patterns, situations where he escalated instead of assessed. And this time there was no brushing it aside because the evidence wasn't private anymore, it was public, and he was terminated within the week. The company issued statements about reform and oversight and training the usual corporate vocabulary, and eventually there was a settlement, confidential number, but enough that people inside the industry started double-checking their own policies real fast, and I went back to work the following Monday, like nothing dramatic had happened. Same lobby, same elevator, same routine, except now people nodded when I passed, not because of my title, but because they'd seen what composure looks like when pressure tries to break it. Still, not everyone agreed with how it all played out. Some folks said I should have resisted more in the moment. Some said I should have let it go afterward. Some said he didn't deserve to lose his job. Others said losing it wasn't enough. And honestly, that's where the real story lives, not in the cuffs or the headlines, but in that uncomfortable question nobody likes answering. How often do we decide what someone is before we know who they are? You know what I mean? Because the truth is, the power shift didn't happen when the cuffs came off. It happened when I stayed calm, when I didn't yell, didn't panic, didn't give him the reaction he expected. And that's the part that sticks with people long after the video ends. So now I want to hear from you. If you'd been standing in that lobby, watching it unfold, what would you have thought in that moment? Was he just doing his job, or did he cross a line the second he assumed I didn't belong there? Tell me honestly in the comments, and if you've ever seen something like this happen in real life, share that too, because conversations like this are how we figure out what justice actually looks like when the cameras are rolling.